is it? Where is it? Where is it? Aha! Earthborne Rangers is like the sugary gloop ensconced in the chocolate layer of a cream egg, simultaneously indulgent and too cloying to be appreciated. This is wrong. Oh no. You're here already, but I haven't finished yet. Listen, have you ever played a board game that is so that you forgot how to human for weeks because you couldn't stop thinking about it? I'm not obsessed. You're obsessed. I am fine, which is something that only a person who's very fine would say. I'm sorry. Dear viewer, clearly I failed you. What you expected was a sensible review with a sensible length of a sensible game. And all I have is a fog of impressions from a never-ending rabbit hole of sheer exuberance and fascination. Or in other words, hey, I'm Efka, and this is a review of Earthborne Rangers, a game that is genuinely one in a million. The review is a bit long, but I think this game is special. So we'll go over some things that make it great, and also some things that are... Please enjoy. Earthborne Rangers is, and I don't say this word lightly, unique. Over the many hours I spent playing it, I've experienced elation, frustration, delight, confusion, satisfaction, and most predominantly, fascination. It has all of these feelings in spades, and it delivered it with such aplomb that no matter what the feeling, positive or negative, I was yearning for more of it. Earthborne Rangers is a campaign game set in our world, but an indeterminate amount of time in the future. Countless catastrophes led to an emergence of a society that is more caring for environment, one that is simultaneously familiar and alien. Wall hunts prowl its woodlands, irixes roam the mountainside, kelpweed floats in the lakes, and the shores are observed by the keen eyes of romping lutrinals. Which, if your English, sounds a little bit like a naughty toilet, but let's not dwell on that. This flora and fauna isn't just cards that populate this world, this is the key driving force in a campaign game unlike any campaign game I have played before. It is no one thing, not even two or three things blended together. It is just Earthborne Rangers. The most obvious comparison is the Lord of the Rings living card game and Arkham Horror the card game, because all three of these are cooperative spin-offs of the deck construction idea popularized by Magic the Gathering. They've even had some of the same people working on them, but that gives you completely the wrong impression. Like in those, Earthborne Rangers will ask you to create a character in the same way you would build a deck in Magic the Gathering. Here's a pool of cards, put in 30, here's how many of each type you must include, then run it through a gauntlet. But the ethos of what is a gauntlet is so alien, not to just the cooperative LCGs of yore, but to cooperative games in general, that we might as well be comparing a can opener to Lady Gaga. Their function is different, the ethos is different, the purpose is different. So, let's begin exactly where the game begins, with Juniper Biscuits. After the game's severely misjudged prologue, which walks you through creating your deck, we'll talk about that later, you are officially initiated as a Ranger of the Valley and are given your first quest: deliver some biscuits. I think it's telling that the game introduces itself to you with something that is lighthearted and trivial. It sets up expectations, but it also gives you time to acclimatize with its unusual structure. Each session is what is called a day. A given day might have anywhere from 1 to an unlikely 24 rounds, and unless you've not been fortunate, it is up to you when a day ends. It also has its own weather card, which is like a difficulty modifier. And even though the campaign suggests the weather for any given day, this is something you can change based on preference. What you do in that day is also entirely up to you, but generally you will stumble into missions, and you might want to complete those missions if the inclination takes you. Each time you play, you will also be at a location. Some locations have their own set of characters and feature cards, meaning you might encounter those as you play. Some will pull from a generic list of characters and features you might stumble onto as you journey through the valley. All of those will be shuffled into your path deck, together with whatever terrain you are traveling on, and these are perhaps the most pivotal cards in the entire game. Each terrain is itself a story, but not a story of narrative, a story of a microcosm. For example, woodlands are home to deer, wall hunts, brambles, thickets, and a living acid slime. Other terrain types feature their own particular blends of flora and fauna that I won't spoil in this video. Part of the joy of Earthborne ranges is discovering these things for yourself. And it all makes sense. What do you expect to find in the woods? Trees, European animals, lots of acid. I grew up in Europe. I can confirm all of these are true. The path deck is therefore a collection of obstacles, threatening creatures, but also various points of interest. Each round, each player will draw one path card, and then based on what it is, either place it along the way, which is a shared zone between all players, or within reach of themselves, which is a closer personal area. With me so far? Okay, this is where it gets really bizarre. If this was any other board game, you would probably hunt the deer with a trap, cook its meat on a fire, and then roll a d20 to critical hit on the wall hunts because wolves are your favorite enemy. The closest thing to a weapon in the entire set of starting cards is a walking stick. And it's so ineffective at fighting things off that you would have better luck arming yourself with a loincloth. The equipment you do actually get to use are a pair of sneakers, reading material, some leftovers, a whistle, and a jar of tea. Amazing if you're trying to survive in 70s England, less so in a post-apocalypse. Like, what do you even do with any of that? How is that useful? Well, spoiler alert, it is useful, and you already probably figured out why. The game doesn't want you to hunt, cook, and critical hit. It wants you to vibe with nature. I know how that sounds, okay? Just bear with me. Your number one source of agency in the game are tests. You have 4 tests available at all times: traverse, avoid, connect, and remember. And a cavalcade of other tests that you might find on the gear, attachment, and moment cards in your deck, and the path cards you encounter from the path deck. Anytime you wish to perform a test, you spend at least 1 energy of the associated type. If you want to traverse, better stretch those glutes, you'll be spending fitness. You can then additionally discard any cards from your hand, foregoing their effect to boost that test's value as long as they have a matching symbol. A traverse test requires compasses, so these cards, they can get in the bin. Finally, you'll draw a challenge card, which will modify the value based on what energy you've used, anywhere from a -2 to a +1. If your number is still equal or higher than the difficulty of the test, congrats! You have just successfully walked, which makes you better at ranging than a baby. However, and this is where the real spice resides, each challenge card also has this stripe at the bottom featuring one of 3 symbols: mountain, sun, bird. And then every card on the table, the weather, the location, the mission, things along the way and within reach of you, activate as long as they have that symbol. Let me show you how that works by donning my official Ranger of the Valley uniform. Ta-da! It's good, right? Hello, I'm Ranger Efka, but with a silent B, cause I'm from the future, and I'm here to guide you on your first steps to nature as represented by card mechanisms. Let's examine our terrain. Currently, we have 4 cards in front of us: a Sunberry Bramble, a Sitka Doe, a Sitka Buck, and a Prowling Wall Hunt. There's a bunch of other rules that come into play here, like fatigue and presence, but we'll ignore these for now and focus on these challenge icons. Let's say I did perform a traverse test to travel to Lone Tree Station and drew this challenge card with the mountain symbol. After I complete any effects of my test, any cards on the table with that mountain symbol will resolve their mountain effect. First, the Sunberry Bramble will trigger. It'll exhaust a prey card, add progress to it, and harm to the bramble. Both the buck and the doe are prey, so I'll choose the buck. It found some food, ate it, got distracted. Effects on exhausted cards don't trigger, so we can ignore the buck's effect. Next is the doe, which asks me to exhaust an active predator and put harm on the doe equal to the predator's presence. There is a predator, it's the wall hunt. It gets busy eating the doe, which suffers enough harm to be completely removed from the board. And the wall hunt is now sated and won't be bothering us until the end of the round. By performing 1 travel test, we got rid of 1 card that was bothering us, exhausted another 2, and we weren't even interacting with any of them. We were just walking, observing. Meanwhile, nature was doing its own thing. But what would have happened if we drew a challenge card with a different symbol? Well, as you can tell, the red eagle symbol might be a little less friendly. Both the bramble and the doe do not feature it, so we can ignore them. However, the buck will injure me if there is an active doe. There is. Ouch. And the wall hunt will injure me if I have free cards in my fatigue pile. I do. Double ouch. This is an ultra-specific example of what would happen if these exact 4 cards were in these exact positions and I drew the challenge cards with these exact symbols. Introduce another variable into the environment, such as the caustic mulcher who eats beings indiscriminately, or a friendly skiff pilot who has no idea how to behave around a prowling wall hunt, and you have a very different cocktail of events every time you attempt a challenge. The only way you can learn to navigate all of that is to watch the game play out. Earthborne Rangers demands, more than any other design, to observe how all of these elements behave, to understand how its environment functions. And that was just the woodland set. Every terrain set in the game has different plants, animals, features, each behaving in distinct ways. Once we wrangled our brains around the woodlands and the lakeshore sets, with a very confident look on our faces, we wandered into the mountains, and our bravado was rewarded with permanent fear. For the rest of the campaign, traveling to a terrain we haven't encountered before felt about as welcome as putting our foot in a bag of razors, but also kind of weirdly exciting because it was an opportunity to discover something new, to witness how things work. What is the swamp like? Why is it circular? How bad can the fields of grass be? I mean, it's just grass, right? Right? Says man who gets a paper cut twice a day. It'll be fine. Partly this works because of the delightfully inventive setting. Earthborne Rangers does a fantastic job at presenting a setting that you wouldn't necessarily want to live in, but if there was a Disney World version of this, I'd actually want to go to Disney World. I already mentioned the skiff, a union between grasshopper and helicopter, naturally. And if this tickled your sci-fi mustache, prepare for reverb lockets, cities built on trees, spider pad gloves, and a radio-enhanced good boy. There is a vibe to Earthborne Rangers, a vibe that's similar to, say, Scavenger's Reign, or the works of Becky Chambers, or even Horizon Zero Dawn, but also very clearly its own. And if you've enjoyed any of those 3, and much more so if you enjoyed all of them, Earthborne Rangers might just become the most special board game in your collection. It is sufficiently similar to our world, and yet sufficiently alien to tantalize my curiosity. It is purpose-built to show you something new, to satisfy and explore as heart. It's tinkered to perfection, a clockwork of cards, not an open world, an open body, a wound that shows you how the innards pump. It is sincere and kind, a warm cup of tea, an environmental story gremlin. It doesn't ask questions, it sets you up to ask those questions yourself. What's over there? Can that eat me? This cave looks safe. What's at the bottom? Every path card you encounter, whether it's Bramble, Wolf, or even your boss, can be cleared. You can clear a card in 2 ways, via progress or harm. This is the primary way you interact with the game. For example, if you've encountered an overgrown thicket, you can perform a traverse test to put progress on it. Place enough progress on it, and thematically you've walked around it, found a gap through it, or maybe you even jumped over it, you jumpy scoundrel. Other cards might let you perform tests that place harm on path cards. This Carbon 4 trowel lets you place or remove harm to a flora equal to your effort. Take that! Thicket. Many cards in the game are just pests and you want to tame, evade, or walk around them, etc. Clear them to get them in the bin. Out of here. Don't want you. But some cards are made from special spice. When characters or features of interest enter play, they'll refer to a passage in the campaign book. This is usually some sort of an introduction to the character or location you just discovered. To interact with it further, to engage with whatever story it has brewing for you, First, you have to clear it by placing progress or sometimes harm on it. Then you get to read another passage. This, on the surface, might seem like a simple system, but so much of what makes Earthborne Rangers special lies in the gubbins of this mechanism. Encountering the same person might mean different things. When you clear them, you might read a passage that gives you a new mission, but when you complete their request, you might have to return to them and clear them with progress again to complete the mission, reading an entirely different passage. Sometimes different passages might trigger because you encounter a person in a special location, or maybe you made an impression on their friend, information you would have previously recorded on your campaign sheet. Maybe something devastating happened to a location whilst you've been away, and then when you return to it, you find it in desperate need of your help. The gears of this world keep turning even when you're not looking. Clearing a card via harm could have alternating consequences too. Some friendly characters might run afoul of predators. If they're ever cleared via harm, you might be forced to end the day there and then. It's nice to see a familiar face from time to time, but if you're currently being stalked by a cyber puma, maybe it's not ideal if that guy you met down the pub last night comes screaming out of the woods about how he was killing it at karaoke. And that's all good and interesting, but think about how Earthborne Rangers asks you to interact with its story elements. If this was any other adventure game, you'd probably get a text prompt that says you can either talk to this person or clonk them over the head with your walking stick. Pick one, roll some dice, ooh, maybe there's a surprise. To even engage with someone, you have to perform what is likely multiple tests, and that's not taking into account a gang of Canis lupus humungus trying to eat you, and you won't even know what you'll talk about. Will they offer us a quest? Perhaps a restorative? They want us to do what now? On a Sunday? I've heard Earthborne Rangers described as delayed gratification more than once, and that's absolutely apt. But I think what that summation omits is what the game achieves with this slow pace. Every character you meet, every location you visit, every wonder of the past world alien to your heroes is a breadcrumb trail leading you by the nose into a carnival of adventure. I'm making it sound very exciting, but I need you to understand, and I take no joy in this comparison. In actual play, Earthborne Rangers is more akin to Death Stranding, a game so singular in its vision that it named its American bridge-building courier main character Sam Porter Bridges, a game where you spend hours walking, falling down, carrying boxes, picking up fallen down boxes, walking, falling down, dropping your boxes, walking, boxes down, falling, boxes, walking. Guillermo! However, unlike Death Stranding, there is an earnestness here that doesn't feel obtuse or full of pomp. It really wants you to have an adventure. It wants you to find new places, new characters, new ideas. And that delayed gratification is exactly the appetizer that will make you salivate at the potential of what you can discover. An amuse-bouche to whet your appetite for the post-apocalyptic at its weirdest and most joyful, navigated by a cooperative CCG system of all things. Which brings us to our last ingredient, because what is a CCG without fun cards? And Earthborne Rangers absolutely has those. But whilst I'm on video game comparisons, the system itself feels more like Skyrim with 300 mods installed. It's a decade and a half out of date. It creaks and throws out crash reports whenever it feels like it. I mentioned the prologue being misguided, and that's honestly me being gentle. After a somewhat tumultuous rulebook, the game attempts to ease you in via a prologue that encourages you to construct your deck as you play based on your character's imagined personality. Are they a fit shepherd, an agile shaper? Maybe consider these cards. A mechanism that is absolutely great to illustrate why this endeavor is doomed in failure is Scout. Anytime you get to scout the path deck, you draw a number of path cards and put them back on the path deck, either on top or bottom. This lets you anticipate the dangers and avoid the scariest encounters from the game's various locales. But almost every card in the game that lets you scout the path deck then forces you to draw one path card, meaning that it increases the total number of threats you will encounter. At first glance, Scout feels like a useful mechanism with a potential downside. Maybe something you would include in your deck, but not something you feel like relying on. And so you build your deck in the prologue with these assumptions. Thing is, Scout is so pivotal that you might as well pack it in if one of your characters isn't at least supremely good at it. So many of the game's missions and challenges revolve around finding the exact right card in the path deck. The ability to manipulate it is one of the most important tools in the arsenal, but not only does Earthborne Rangers ask you to make these assumptions without actually understanding how it works, it then also prevents you from changing your deck. You can swap out cards for various new cards you unlock via completing missions, but otherwise you are restricted to various special events to make changes to the base set of cards, and even then those changes are severely limited because many card swaps are entirely impossible. Our first attempt at playing a campaign ended after 2 sessions, after we realized both of our decks did absolutely nothing. It was only after we restarted with a couple of suggested deck lists on the Earthborne Rangers website did we actually start to understand potential combos or powerful plays that made us feel like we were just beginning to engage with the game's systems. And even then it was a rocky road because those deck lists don't account for what roles need to be filled or player count. My question is this: if we aren't encouraged to tweak our decks unless we're restarting a campaign that can take up to 30 sessions, why frame it in this corporative CCG structure that is made famous by deck constructing, the beckoning call to most fans of the genre? It's like one of those adopt a donkey schemes. You pay for the donkey, but there is no donkey in your house. I want a donkey. Why won't you give me a donkey, game? My best guess is that this is intentional, a deliberate subversion of a tried and true experience, an encouragement to live with what we have, galvanize and repurpose existing tools in direct opposition to the throw out the commons and keep the rare mentality that would be so in tune with this game's environmental messaging. I can kind of get behind that, but even when we copied our deck lists to the suggested ones, because of the 2 that we chose, we found that so much of that combination was at cross purposes and didn't complement a playstyle that we enjoyed. We had odd cards that just weren't useful in any situation. I am behind the messaging, I just don't think the messaging is particularly effective when it makes you less invested in the whole thing. The other ethos that is so evidently present is the discover it yourself mentality, which also extends to the game's rules. Combine that all together and you have an unusual game with unclear rules and unclear intentions. And in the interest of fairness, I will say that Earthborne Rangers almost gets away with it. But I'm a little tired of thinking, hey, what's up with this mission? It seems broken, to only realize that at page 22, paragraph 4, section 7, article 9, subsection 12, bullet point 42, it clearly states that when you get a search mission, you have to place the subject card underneath the mission card, thus not shuffling it into the path deck. Did you remember reading that in the rulebook? No? Well, now you broke the mission and the game is confused. The reason I say that the game almost gets away with it is, well, because it's obviously not ideal. The game can and should put rules reminders on cards and the campaign booklet, but with a little bit of a duct tape and WD-40 attitude, you will eventually get used to the game's intentions and rules vagaries and settle into a groove. I feel like rules-wise, Earthborne Rangers is an ugly duckling. It's using a system that wasn't really built for what it's doing, pushing it to its absolute limits. Kind of like if someone tried to do a story and improv heavy TTRPG, but used the Pathfinder system as the skeleton for their game. When it works, it's sublime, transformative. When it doesn't, you feel like you need to be a car mechanic just to take this thing out for a drive. One of my genuinely favorite mechanisms from this game is the day mechanism, which feels like such a natural advancement on adventure board games that you will find yourself asking, why haven't board games been doing this forever? In almost any adventure game, your game session is a scenario. You have a mission, do the mission ends, you end the game session. This is true for Gloomhaven, Oathsworn, Descent 3rd Edition, Kinfire, even this game's predecessors, Lord of the Rings and Arkham Horror, the card games. In Earthborne Rangers, your play session could have no missions, 5 missions, anywhere in between. You might complete multiple missions in a session, or again none, some within 5 minutes of starting play, some in the middle, but you are the ultimate decider of when a day ends. Anytime you travel away from a location, you can set up camp and end the session. Unless you've not been very fortunate. If your deck runs out of cards and you have to draw one, the day ends. If a friendly character is cleared via harm, the day ends. And crucially, if you ever acquire free injuries, the day ends. And this time, you add a permanent injury card into your deck. This is perhaps the most the game offers in actual fail states. The difference between ending the day on your terms and being forced to do it by the rules is that in the latter, you cannot make alterations to your deck. So if you just completed a mission and got a cool new card, better find a safe place to keep or you won't be able to use it next sesh. Or at least, that's what the rules say. The way it actually plays out is that your penalty is that you will have to start in the same place and the same terrain where you last finished, making you reface the same issues and wasting you time. It just generally makes you feel sloggy. As far as penalties go, I think this is a great one. It nails that really narrow landing of not making you feel like failure is the end of your story. It's just one thing in a day full of events, but it is still a penalty. Earthborne Rangers feels natural. When your ranger injures themselves 15 minutes from starting play, twice, you feel accountable. You feel accountable to the other players because you have to say to them, I'm really sorry, I know we just started the session, but I think we have to end it because I was a doofus, and if we get another injury, we're gonna have to end it again and they'll have a permanent injury. Somehow, that becomes part of your story. And that's more than any text prompt could ever achieve. And also you can just then start the next session. It's not like a real penalty. You can keep on playing. But to get there, to sculpt this naturalistic expression of adventure with its lulls and plateaus on a chassis of what is essentially Magic the Gathering, a lot of clay had to be used to mask what's underneath. Sequences and phases and steps that all have to be executed in precise order to keep the machine churning. Maintenance via lubrication. What Magic the Gathering always did well, and perhaps the thing that it's really famous for, is its enduring ability to express thematic elements via artwork and mechanisms on each card. It is unsurprising then that Earthborne Rangers just runs away with it. My Travelers/Explorers favorite combo is the 1-2 punch of Strider and Walk With Me. Strider does not have an effect by itself, it simply adds free compass symbols, which are very helpful with traverse tests. It's also self-explanatory. I walk in nature. I know how to do that. Where the thematic moment flourishes is Walk With Me, an encounter of understanding between human and other. Mechanically, the way this combo plays out is that when you perform a traverse test, just discard Strider for the free compass symbols, get a big amount of effort for the location or feature that you were traversing, and then play Walk With Me to place an equal amount of effort on a being, which is pretty much just any card that represents something alive. With one test, you overcome 2 cards, sometimes clearing away the most pressing issues on the board. Thematically, however, you are crossing trails well worn to find a link between you and something that lives and breathes by different rules. 2 creatures share what's in common. Find what connects you. The art on Walk With Me really helps too. It's gorgeous. Little note, Strider only works on cards that have the trail trait on them, but that's cool because you carry trail markers with you. Anything is a trail as long as you've got breadcrumbs. Green Thumb increases the harm threshold of a Flora card, then casts Nature's Abundance, and every ranger can put 1 harm on it to gain 1 energy of any type, which is again thematically so sweet. Green Thumb says you know how to harvest things in slightly more efficient ways than just ripping the whole thing out of the ground and seeing if it tastes good. Nature's Abundance says, yes indeed, it does taste good. These little moments are precisely the right embellishment that complement the explorative nature of Earthborne Rangers. Alone, they won't make the story, but as little details you find in the background of the frame, that just the right amount of character to lift the rest of it up. The game's focus on characterization somewhat explains that weird prologue. The mandatory personality cards with little effect, the thematic combos, your attributes representing how much you can achieve in the day and what cards you can include in your deck, it all paints a picture of your deck as an extension of a character you created in this world. Which, okay, not the first game to do that, but Here, Earthborne Rangers does something very small and unexpected that took me really by surprise when Elaine first spotted it. In most TTRPGs and adventure board games, when you create a character, you have a very good sense of what they're good at and especially what they're bad at. Low charisma? Just don't talk to that person, okay? Do not roll that deception test. We know how that ended last time. Here, you get to be bad at something and still meaningfully try it. And the game fosters a real collaborative nature in that way. If I'm very good at traversing, I might just not get us all the way there, a few progress tokens shy. And then my Shaper Herbalist companion, who's terrible at traversing, might still add a progress token or two, helping us complete the journey. Through the sense of discovery, through environments alive via triggers, through its cooperative ethos, thematic flourishes on cards, and that fluid day system, Earthborne Rangers composes its open world. It wouldn't work anywhere else. It's too mechanical and slow and contemplative for video games, and the narrative is too drab and rote to be a novel. The Earthborne Rangers narrative will not win any awards. The big story beats are not at all poorly written, but they do fall into the tried and true. It's the moment of rumination that this game provokes that really gets to me. I had more mileage thinking about it in the shower than actually sitting at the table. Its characters and forking paths are settled in various approaches to cohabitation, and whilst they absolutely conform to ideals, none of them seem as comprehensive answers. Always more questions with this game, and I sometimes wonder if why I'm so fascinated with it is just because there's so much to chew on. Then I sit down and play it and go, no, what was I thinking? It's great. Then I get in the shower and start pondering whether we have the right to harvest things. Are trees just as alive as us? What is this cycle of life and death, and why has it persisted through eons? I'm playing this for a joke, but I also kind of mean it. I used to think that when people said we have to learn to live with nature, what they meant was that we have to be good to nature, as if nature was something delicate, and we, the overlords of our world, we have to show kindness to this thing that we tamed. Nature does not give one hoot to how we treat it. We can be as gentle or as mean as we like. We can be stroppy kids trampling everything we see under our boot. It matters not. Nature is beyond us, impervious to our reach. The only thing that we can hurt is ourselves, and also current plants and animals. There's so many board games out there that depict the beauty of nature. Mushrooms, trees, birds of all sizes, wolves, bears, rabbits, cows if you have to. They're all magnificent to look at, and art transposes that beauty. But beauty is just one aspect of nature. It can be cruel, uncaring, even dangerous, just as much as it can be wondrous or nurturing. It was here before us, and it will be here when we perish. A mother that gave birth to us that will inevitably outlast us. We are helpless without it. It is that nature that Earthborne Rangers lets us observe, full of marvel and peril, operating via its own rules. If we're clever, if we watch and learn those rules, we might just about survive, tumbling boulders, steep cliffs, dense forests, and a whole host of amazing creatures. It might even let us be a little cavalier about it. I don't know what great art is, but I know that good art stays with you. And if I wanted to poke holes in Earthborne Rangers as a product, I could do it with my eyes closed. Great at 2 players because there's just the right amount of those path cards coming out to form interactions, but too busy at 4 and too restricted at solo. I've got a dozen of these in my pocket, and none of them can explain why this is one in a million. A game like no other. A monumental achievement even with its quirks. A synecdoche of an environmental game composed out of many separate parts, all cohabiting one large system. And I don't know if you'll love it or hate it. It's a coin toss, and frankly, I'm not bothered either way. If you're the least bit curious, there's no way this game won't leave an impression on you, as long as you are patient, as long as you give it time. Hey, thanks for sticking through this entire thing. If you want even more on this game, there's an interview with Andrew Navarro, the CEO of Earthborne Games, on our podcast Talk Cardboard, where we talk about the production of Earthborne Rangers and its push for more environmentally sustainable practices in board games. There's also a great write-up by BGG user Halmarsta about those publishing practices from the perspective of an actual climate scientist. It's a fascinating read, and the link for both of those is in the description. I also want to take some time to recommend adjacent things for those of you who are curious. I already mentioned Scavenger's Reign, a tale of survival on an alien planet that is supremely indulgent in exploring alien flora and fauna. It is very Earthborne Rangers in vibe, slow, methodical, rich. On the other side of the vibe spectrum is the works of Becky Chambers, especially her Monk and Robot series, where a human and a robot go on a road trip in a solar punk universe. One reviewer described it as simultaneously mundane and wondrous, which are the two words I would use to describe Earthborne Rangers. Instead, I used 6,000. Whilst we're on books, I have a couple of recommendations that are a bit left field setting wise, but absolute spot on matches with its themes. Ray Naylor's The Mountain in the Sea is a cyberpunk-ish novel that centers on the emergence of a new intelligent species and how that would play out in a hyper-capitalist AI-fueled world. It's bleak, but there's a faint line of hope running through all of it. Martin McInnes' Gathering Evidence is playing in similar spaces, but has the additional benefit of 1/3 of the book spent in a camp of scientists observing bonobo chimpanzees, and will leave you provoked, confused, downright angry. It's good stuff. The only reason we can spend so much time working on one video independently without the financial assistance from publishers, that's right, this is not a review copy, we bought this game ourselves, is because people support us on a website called Patreon, where they give us a bit of money every month. If you can't afford to support us, you can still follow us on Patreon. We post extra stuff there. Tomorrow we'll have a post about the behind the scenes making of the thumbnail of this video, and you can read that for free. And also, if you can't support us, please just consider subscribing to us on YouTube. It helps us way more than you would think. See you soon.